sponsored by the James Madison Council and the National Endowment for the Arts.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 Library of Congress National Book Festival. I'm Ron Charles. I write about books for the Washington Post. I'm here with two best-selling authors I've admired for a long time. Kristin Hannah, author of The Four Winds, and Maggie Shipstead, author of Great Circle. To learn more about Kristin Hannah and Maggie Shipstead, check out the festival website at loc.gov/bookfest. Before we begin, please remember that we'll save the last 10 minutes of this 30-minute live event to respond to your questions, which you can start submitting right now. Kristin and Maggie, welcome.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's so nice to have you here. I wish we were in person, but this is even better because now we can talk to people all over the world. I hope you've both been doing well during the interesting times we've had. Let me just ask, where are you both?
I'm outside of Seattle.
I'm in Los Angeles.
Nice.
I'm in Los Angeles, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I enjoyed both your books so much. They're big historical novels about women in the 20th century, The Four Winds and The Great Circle. The Four Winds is about a mother looking for work in California during the Depression, and The Great Circle is about, or at least half of it is about a young woman who becomes an airplane pilot when so-called lady pilots were something of a novelty. So I'd like to ask each of you, Kristin, if you could go first, to tell us about the research you did to bring these fictional characters alive in such historically rich settings.
Well, obviously, Ron, the research is really sort of my bread and butter, and it's what I love doing, and it's really what informs the whole novel and the whole story. And for this book, it really began with looking for a time period in America that seemed relevant to today, where I could sort of bring a female perspective to it that I thought would be interesting in today's world. And it begins, like all research does, with the big picture. You're looking for sort of the geopolitical, social things that were going on at the time. And that, sort of takes me down various different roads. And at some point along the process, I begin reading memoirs and interviewing people and reading old newspaper and journal accounts. And that's really where I think the best of my research comes from. And I feel like it's my job to take all of that research and sort of give it to the reader as a story that they can emotionally connect to.
It is very emotionally involving. I mean, I was desperate for that woman and her children to survive and do better. Did you go to farms? I mean, did you travel? Were you able to leave your house? I'm not sure exactly when you composed it. I hope it was before COVID.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I began the book about 4 years ago, and the book was absolutely in its final stage done 3 weeks before the lockdown hit here in Washington State. So I was able to go to Texas and Oklahoma and California and, see a lot of these settings. And in fact, the migrant camp that was built, the FSA camp that was built in California by the state, there's a lot of it that is not only still standing, but they have what's called a Dust Bowl Days celebration there. And so I was able to go and actually meet and talk to children who had grown up in the camps.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that, but they would be how old now?
Well, they don't seem so old to me as they used to. They're like, there's the grandparents, the parents, and the kids. And what's really interesting about this part of California, this is the Bakersfield area, a lot of these people stayed there, they became Californians. That's why they had come west. And so this is a very big part of the local culture, and they've stayed and they're very proud of this heritage. And so it's easy to find people to talk to about it.
Wow. And Maggie, how about you? Your novel is so full of aviation history, of the two poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. What sort of research were you able to do?
Oh, it was just an ongoing nightmare of never-ending research. I'm sort of incapable of planning my books. So I knew that I was writing a book about a female pilot. That was sort of the initial seed of the idea, which I had in late 2012, I think. And I didn't start working on it until fall of 2014, at which point the only thing I knew was that my pilot would disappear while trying to fly around the world north-south. And I'd consulted with my brother, who used to be a pilot in the Air Force, and sort of picked out her route around the world and what kind of plane she would fly. But beyond that, I had sort of nothing. And so it's kind of a whim that I then started the book with the construction and launch of an ocean liner in Scotland. So I had to, acquire all these books about ocean liners and look into that and how a launch would work. And so it's just, my original manuscript that I sold was almost 1,000 pages long. And so it was kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back for 1,000 pages. And then there was this whole other element of, I wanted to see some of the places that Marion, the pilot, would go on her round the world flight, including the polar regions, where when I started writing, I'd never been. So over the years that I was writing the book, I also started writing for travel magazines and would sort of pitch places I wanted to go that were relevant to the book. And then sometimes I'd randomly end up somewhere that I could then incorporate into the book. So sort of this symbiotic relationship between the travel that I did and what I could use for the book. So I wound up going to Antarctica twice. I've been to the Arctic 5 or 6 times. Yeah, so
those are not easy trips, right?
No, they weren't.
Difficult trips. Oh
yeah.
Gosh. What was it like? I mean, that's such a stupid question, but what was it like?
It's amazing. I mean, Antarctica in particular is just otherworldly. And I had sort of thought, well, could I write about it without going there? And I always think the answer is yes. I mean, authors do that all the time. But for me, it was important to sort of see and feel it. And I think that just the sheer remoteness of it was something I couldn't have quite imagined. And I also, part of the book is in the Antarctic interior where you can't really go, or you can, it just costs an absolute fortune. And so the way I got that experience was I pitched a story about our National Guard unit that does polar airlift. And so I went to the Greenland ice sheet to write about these pilots. And so I got the sensation of being in the middle of this perfect disc of white under the sky. And it looks exactly like Antarctica. So I sort of used what I could.
Wow, that is exciting. Kristen, your novel, The Four Winds, feels very much in conversation with John Steinbeck's classic novel, The Grapes of Wrath from 1939, which was published during the Depression. I'm curious about how you see attitudes about those migrant workers and the role of unions shifting or maybe not shifting over the past 80 years.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the book is sort of is kind of paired with The Grapes of Wrath in a way because, so much of it is covering similar ground. I was more interested in the Dust Bowl and the farmers and, the migration of the farmers. But once in California, it was fascinating to me because as a West Coast girl, I didn't know that much about any of this information. I should have known more. I mean, I had read The Grapes of Wrath, but that was pretty much it. And so to sort of realize just how difficult it all was and the resilience and the grit and the sort of cost of the American dream to people was just really fascinating to uncover. And I was not surprised actually at all to see that it still is really relevant today. The issues of migration and how we treat each other and this idea of how workers should be treated and, sort of the rise of unionism. I think all of that is still very much something that should be in conversation. We are so politically divided right now that it's important, I think, to remember our own history and where we've been as we sort of contemplate who we want to be and where we want to go.
I definitely agree. I was kind of shocked to hear how relevant those arguments were about safety standards, labor regulations, minimum wage. I mean, these are arguments straight out of the presidential election.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? And one of the things that I believe so strongly about historical fiction is this idea that if we as a novelist can sort of create empathy, can create understanding, can broaden someone's worldview, then I think we have a lot better chance of coming together and having a dialogue that may be, sort of oppositional, but isn't necessarily angry. And I think that's something that is very important in the world right now, to remember, that I guess as simply as that it matters how we treat each other and how we care for each other.
Right, right. Maggie, in Great Circle, your historical story about Marion Graves, this daring pilot, alternates with a contemporary story about a young Hollywood starlet named Hadley who's playing Marion in a movie about Marion's life. Can you talk to us how you developed that historical contemporary structure and what it allowed you to do with the novel?
Absolutely. Yeah, when I started, as I said, I had no plan whatsoever. And so I didn't have a concept of Hadley, the movie star. And so I was writing, but fairly quickly, I think within the first couple months that I was drafting from the beginning of the book, sort of in this period before Marion's even born, one day I sat down and I wrote a section in the first person of this sort of Hollywood actress. And it, on the surface, had nothing to do with the aviatrix story I was writing. It was about her leaving, it's still in the book, the scene where she leaves a nightclub and sort of publicly cheats on her movie star co-star boyfriend. But for some reason, I just felt like, oh, this is the missing piece. And so I worked out that Hadley would play Marion in this movie, but then the sort of other elements of how the stories would connect were something that it took me more than 3 years to write a first draft, and it took 6 years before it was published. And through a lot of that time, I kept sort of tinkering with Hadley's story and changing the way she connected to Marion. But I've always thought of it as sort of, I needed this other voice, this sort of sharpness, or like I say, it's like a squeeze of lemon, as opposed to just kind of having this uninterrupted, sort of consistent voice that's more earnest, I suppose, around Marion. So for me, it was a relief, the tonal shift, and kind of more importantly, it was a way to sort of cast a lens on, how much is lost when a person dies. So Marion disappears on her flight. She leaves behind a logbook, which is then somebody makes a novel out of it. And then this movie's being made out of that novel. So it's this game of telephone, sort of distorting this person that the reader actually knows quite well and very intimately from that part of the book. And so Hadley was sort of, starts to understand this and detect just how impossible it is to know someone in retrospect, and really how impossible it is to know someone even when you're face to face living your life together. We're all sort of like isolated within our own consciousness. So a lot of the dual structure was about connections between lives and just the passage of time as well.
It also makes an interesting way to study what has changed for daring women over that long period. Some things have changed, some things have not.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hadley is someone where you have to kind of get out the world's tiniest violin for her, because she's enormously rich, she's enormously privileged. She wants to be more famous, but she also feels confined by her fame. And so some of it is there's a bit of a, tongue-in-cheek grappling with that, although she takes it very seriously. But there's still sort of these, impossible expectations on her. Like, she can't possibly perform womanhood correctly. She can't, her relationships will never please everyone, and her sexual behavior will never please everyone, and the way she looks and what she says. So there's still sort of this kind of prison of femininity that's different from the more sort of logistical challenges that Marion faces in trying to become a pilot, and just the lack of opportunities that she has.
Right. But both these novels revolve around questions about what we know or think we know about other people, right? I mean, The Four Winds, the migrant workers are constantly butting up against very negative stereotypes about their morals and their work ethic. And The Great Circle, we're watching Hadley try to figure out what can be known about Marion. That seems so central to what reading a novel is all about, don't you think? A sort of learning to empathize? Or am I being too romantic?
No, I mean, I believe that completely. I mean, I think that's what novels do. I mean, you look at Great Circle and you read it and you have this understanding and admiration for what it took to be that kind of a woman. And it doesn't matter how far we are, how far we've come from that, it is still always difficult to buck the system, always difficult to try to do what hasn't been done before. And especially when your desires or your dreams are ones that are, not ascribed to women. And so I think it's important for women, our daughters, our granddaughters, women coming up, to remind them, how cool women have been and how tough it's been and how to go after what it is you want.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're not an unbiased group since we all live our lives around books. But I mean, for me, reading a book has always been the most sort of direct and immersive way into another person's consciousness, kind of that problem of connection I was describing. And other art forms, I don't know if you're quite in it as much. So theoretically, it should foster empathy. And yeah, I mean, what Kristen was saying, I thought a lot about with Marion, just the relentlessness of having to choose an unorthodox life. And I think novels, give us ways to think about and sort of, I guess, vicariously experience challenges that we don't have or that we might have. I think, this question of relatability often dominates discussions of books, but I don't think books necessarily have to be relatable. I think we should try to reach the level where the book is.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that idea. There is a question of relatability, but it's in the sense that you've put it. The theme of the festival this year is open a book, open the world. And I want to ask each of you, how have books, opened the world for you? Not professionally, of course, but maybe in other ways too.
Well, I think just what we were describing, entering other lives, but I think on a more concrete level too, it's a way to visit and glean understanding of other places and other eras that, maybe through nonfiction isn't as simple. I remember talking to someone who wrote both nonfiction and fiction, and she was saying, when you're writing nonfiction, you can say the army camped by the river, but when you're writing fiction, you have to figure out where they go to the bathroom and what they eat and where they sleep and what the weather's like, and all these questions that in some ways are more immersive and connect us to more places. And I know from my own reading, even as a child, like I was talking about Antarctica earlier. I remember reading Sarah Wheeler's memoir of Antarctica and history of Antarctica as a 13-year-old and thinking, oh, I really have to go there. And I think that sort of interest that gets planted in you as a young person can stay with you your whole life and shape the course of it.
Oh, that's amazing. Kristen, what about you? How have books opened the world up for you?
Well, I come from a very sort of adventurous family, and we moved around a lot. My father moved around a lot. We lived a lot of different lifestyles in a lot of different locations, and just moved from place to place. And so for a lot of my formative years, I was always the new girl, which you'll see in books like The Great Alone. You keep seeing over and over because I keep reliving this, particular horror of my childhood. And one of the things that saved me and that kept me going was, everywhere we went, the first place we stopped, we would get a library card, and I would go to the library and I would start choosing books. And those books became very much not only my best friends, my comfort, but my portal to a different world. And so I could imagine a lot of different ways to look at my future, a lot of different futures to imagine. And so that sort of, I guess, is how it all started for me. I was always the kid whose nose was buried in a book, who had to be told to look up at the Grand Canyon because we were on vacation. And that's really sort of the beginning. And in fact, you'll see in the Four Winds, this idea of books being the opening and books being the way out of whatever current life situation you're in is very much a part of the novel, as it is a part of me.
That's right. I'm not giving anything away to say that your protagonist is a great book reader at first. Remember that? I'm talking to the audience now who's read the book. Yes, she's developed certain ideas about the world from reading all those novels. Some of those ideals are a little misleading, but that plays into the whole plot of the book. And both your books have certainly taken me to places of the world that I've never been: Alaska, the North Pole, the South Pole. I wonder if you would mind taking some reader questions, which are coming in here now. Denise asks, what do you miss most about meeting your readers in person on book tour? Kristen, go first.
Oh, gosh. Just the sort of one-on-one, because one of the things about meeting people on book tour is you instantly have this common life that has to do with books and reading. And so I'm constantly meeting people who I feel like I know because of what they've read. They feel like they know me because of what they've read. And it just becomes, this big love fest about reading and the importance of reading. And I really miss that. I really do. I mean, it was great in Zoom being able to talk like this to people. But I look forward to being able to talk to people in person again.
Maggie, how about you? What do you miss most about meeting people in person?
Yeah, that's so well said. I think too, there's something that's inherently abstract about publishing a book. Like you slave away for years on this thing that's sort of yours, and then it sort of goes out into the ether, and theoretically people are reading it, and you kind of know that. But when you're doing in-person events, you can actually sort of gauge the temperature of the room in a way that you can't over Zoom. And I mean, the room itself is often exciting. It's so nice to go and see bookstores and meet booksellers. So I really miss that as well.
Right. Someone has asked, how has writing these novels changed your view on life and thoughts on how to move forward to push femininity further? I mean, both these books are very women-centered. So I know you've thought about that question a lot.
Well, I've been writing books about strong women long before I realized I was writing books about strong women. It's now sort of very in the forefront of what I do. And I think it's, again, like we were talking about earlier, I think it's just this combination of both keeping the record going, making sure that women's stories are on paper, are being told, are not being forgotten or marginalized, and also just celebrating a lot of these sort of really tough, strong, resilient women who have made a mark on history, whether it is flying across the globe or taking their children west, looking for work, or just, keeping their children alive on a daily basis during hard times.
Right.
Yeah, I'm very much of the more the merrier, philosophy about books in general. There should be books about everything. But I think, the default sort of take on human experience is that it's male. And I think this has shifted a lot even since when I was in high school. But, the bulk of books we read were about men, by men. And so if you read a book about or by a woman, it was seen as sort of like a digression or something special and weird, like the flavor of the month kind of thing. And it's like, women are half the people in the world. It should be part of the default human experience that it could be female. So I think when I was writing this book, I didn't set out to write a feminist book, but then, even though I am a feminist, of course, but to explore the life of this woman in this era who wants to be a pilot, it just becomes this act of feminism for her to do something other than just get married and have children. Although that, of course, is a valid choice as well. So I think it's about sort of honoring the variety of life experiences that women have and should have access to.
Nice. Andy points out that both your novels are set in roughly the same time period, or at least parts of each novel, about a century ago. What is it about that time period that proved so compelling to you?
I think for me, I was really interested in kind of the Wild West of early flight. There were the sort of teens through the early 30s. Airplanes were relatively inexpensive. They were very unregulated. People could just sort of fly. And so there was something sort of exciting about that. And also, I had initially planned to set this book in Nebraska, and then as I actually started writing, I moved it to Montana, where I'd spent more time. And so it was also an interesting transitional time in that particular place, and it gave me a lot of sort of runway, I guess, too, to move forward into through World War II and beyond.
Interesting. Cindy asks, how have women's journals and diaries informed your work? I think it probably, in both cases, had an effect, right? I'm thinking particularly about the journals of Anne Moreau Lindbergh and her travels to Greenland, etc. That'd be mostly for you, Maggie, I suppose. But I know that, Kristen, you use journals too.
Yeah, I mean, journals are huge for me because my books are often, big in scope, but very intimate in the telling. And so the details of sort of everyday life are something that I'm fascinated by. And that's really something that I think helps people really contextualize a story and really puts you in the middle of it. These little intimate details that often I can only get from women's journals or men's journals.
Mm-hmm. And Maggie, the Lindbergh question is interesting.
Yeah, I didn't read as much about Anne Lindbergh. I did read more about Charles Lindbergh, but of course they're, enmeshed for better or for worse. I think the most primary source material that I used was, so Marion during World War II goes to the UK and flies in the Air Transport Auxiliary, which was a civilian organization that transported warplanes. And 20-something American women did this at the time. And at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, they have boxes and boxes of their letters and papers. And so I went there for a few days and went through these, onion skin typewritten letters home from all these women that described their day-to-day through the years. And that was really fascinating. And for exactly the reasons Kristen describes as, helpful in a way that nothing else really could be.
Yeah, that must be interesting. Several people want to know how long it takes you to write a novel. I suppose it differs, but let's just use the last ones you both wrote.
Mine's pretty straightforward, 3 years.
3 years. Maggie?
About a year of research, a year of first draft, and a year of turning that first draft into something that I would, want people to read.
Right.
Oh, that's so interesting that you do research first. I have to do it sort of concurrently. I mean, I came into writing this book with a really false expectation because I'd written my first novel in 8 months. I wrote my second novel in 5 months. And so I was like, I'm just going to bust one out. It's no big deal. And it took me 3.5 years to write the first draft, which was 1,000 pages long. And then it was a year of revision until I sold it. And then it was another 2 years and 8 months before it was actually published. So it was a long time.
Wow. Carol wants to know, are both of you thinking about next books you might write, or is that too much to ask now that you're working on, promoting these books?
I am actually, well, Ron, I've been doing this for a really long time. So I'm happiest when I'm writing. It turned out, interestingly enough, that I was very unproductive during the pandemic, which is unusual. Because one of the ways that I have sort of kept myself going in this career year after year is I try to be working on the next novel when the previous novel comes out, because otherwise it can be a little upsetting or difficult to sort of follow books. And so this one, anyway, the bottom line is I have just started the new novel. I'm kind of late, but I'm about a third of the way in, maybe.
Can you tell us anything about it?
I can tell you that it's another historical novel with, centered around a woman's journey in a time period that I think is really overlooked for women. So it just sounds like all the rest of them, doesn't it?
I know it will not read that way. Maggie, how about you?
It's very mysterious. That makes me feel a lot better you weren't productive during the pandemic. I haven't been either. You would think, you always want uninterrupted time at home. And this was like a horrible devil's bargain. And didn't work at all. But I have a collection of short stories coming out in June, which seems really fast. I just got copy edits yesterday and I was like, what?
Wow.
Like, you want me to do this? And I have started another novel, but it's just been put on pause as I'm doing all the Great Circle stuff. And so we'll see. But it's about a family. I'm trying very hard to control the scope this time.
Well, we'll look forward to both those books. It's such a pleasure. I've read you guys for years and just loved your books. And it's so nice to be able to meet you here. And I'm so glad you came and talked to us. Thank you thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. Great talking to you both. Maggie, congratulations on the Booker Prize. And I hope everyone goes out and reads Great Circle. It's awesome.
Oh, likewise. Thanks so much.
Those of you out in the audience, thanks for watching and submitting questions. I want to mention that both these authors have great websites of their own. Just Google their names and they'll pop right up. You can continue to enjoy the National Book Festival at loc.gov/bookfest. Thank you so much.